Hi and welcome to WEH Videos. My name is Skip, and in this video we are going to talk about the flaps, what they do and how to use them. And you can get more information about the flaps in the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, Chapter 5. You can scroll down here and there is a wealth of information on how flaps work, how the wings work, etc. So be sure to take a look at Chapter 5 of the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. If you don't have the Pilot Handbook for Aeronautical Knowledge, I suggest you download it from www.faa.gov. I'll put the link here so you can see it. You can get it in PDF format by the chapter or the whole book. So again, go to www.faa.gov. The flaps on the Cessna 172 are located on the wings between the ailerons and the fuselage. So the flaps are right here. The flaps work together. When you lower the flaps, the flap on both wings will go down together. Unlike the ailerons, you notice as the left aileron goes up, the right one goes down. That's how we control the turn of the airplane. But with the flaps, we want to be able to fly the airplane a little slower. When we lower flaps, we can fly at slower speeds. However, there's a price to pay when lowering flaps. Flaps add drag. In other words, you're going to need more power to maintain a speed when you lower the flaps. So under normal conditions, you will only need flaps when landing. Now there are circumstances where you might want to or need to use flaps, so we're just going to discuss the flaps during a landing. So when the flaps are lowered, the wings produce more lift, which allows us to fly at a much slower speed. However, as I mentioned earlier, there's a price to pay for this extra lift. Flaps cause drag. When the flaps are extended, the extra drag will cause the airplane to slow down. So you will need more power if you want to maintain a certain speed. But we're talking about the landings, and we definitely want to slow down. So on the Cessna 172N, which we are flying here, we have three positions for the flaps. We have a 10-degree flap setting, a 20-degree flap setting, and a 40-degree flap setting. So the question is, when and how do you use your flaps? Now you may have watched other videos where you are told exactly a specific time when you should use your flaps and how much you should use. For example, I've heard people say, well, on the downwind you want 10 degrees of flaps, 20 degrees on the base turn, and full flaps on final. Now, I don't necessarily agree with this idea because it won't work all the time. Every landing is unique. You will almost never have the same conditions when landing from day to day. Winds and air temperatures play a big part in how your airplane performs, so you'll need to adapt to the conditions in which you are flying. To demonstrate this, I'll set up two landing scenarios, one with no wind and one with a strong headwind, 15 knots, to show you how using flap varies depending on the conditions. And we're going to start with the no wind scenario. Remember, speed is important when landing, right? Too fast, and you could end up just bouncing down a runway. Too slow, you may not make the runway. So we want to control our speed, and the flaps can help us do that. So let's take a look at a landing with the flap settings for no wind. All right, here we are set up for a landing at Benton Field. Here's the airport over here, and we are going to be landing on runway 33, which is right here. Now I have set up an airspeed indicator, a ground speed indicator, and a winds indicator to show the direction and the speed of the winds. Now I want you to take a close look at the indicated airspeed and the ground speed under each scenario. You will notice that the indicated airspeed and the ground speed will be very close in this no wind situation. So here we go. We're entering downwind. We're a little bit below pattern altitude. The flaps are up. And now I want to get ready for a landing. So I'm going to slow down. I got the carb heat on. I'm going to slow down. And what I'll do is I'll set the RPM for 1,500 under these conditions. And I'll trim, using a trim wheel, to get 500 feet per minute on the descent rate. Now that'll normally give you around 70 knots, but we don't have any flaps and we're not there, so I'm going to add 10 degree of flaps. Now remember, this is not rocket scientists here. We're just going along with our conditions. So I need 10 degrees of flaps. That's what I've got. And we're starting to slow down to around 70 knots. We got a ways to go yet before we turn. Now I'm not going to chase this needle. It doesn't have to be 500 feet per minute. And I'm not going to chase the throttle. Make sure I'm 1,500 RPMs. 1,500. All right, we're getting ready. We're going to make that turn, that base turn now. And I can go to 20 degrees flaps if I want. I don't have to, but I think I will. Again, this just depends on your conditions. I'm going to go to the flaps because I can. It's not a requirement that I do that. So now I'm on 20 degree flaps and I've turned base. We're taking a look at the runway over there. We're going to be making our final turn here pretty quick. I'm adding a little power to keep that speed up until I get on final. And let's go ahead and turn final. Take a look for where's the runway. It's way over there. Okay, I'm not flying this very well, but that's okay. I'm on final. I'm a little high. I'm going to go to full flaps. Notice the ground speed and the air speed are pretty close. Now we want to land right around 55 knots. 50 knots would be okay. At full flaps, we can get down to about 45 if we wanted to. But this is a normal landing. Still a little high. I've cut the power completely to get down to the runway. So here we go. We're at 52 knots. Notice that ground speed and airspeed very similar. I'm going to pull back now to see if we can just touch down right on the center line, nice and easy and nice and slow. So we have a ground speed here of 39 knots and an airspeed of 39 knots, and that's under the no wind conditions. So it was necessary to go to full flaps to get slow enough to land. If I tried to do this landing without using flaps, just coming straight in, I probably would not get below 70 knots, and you're just not going to touch down doing 70 knots in a 172. All right, let's try the other scenario now with a 15 knot headwind on final. On downwind for runway 33 at Benton. Notice our indicated airspeed this time. We have a 15 knot tailwind at this point because we're headed downwind. Indicated airspeed is a little over 70 knots. Ground speed 88 knots. So I can't use the same routine I used to land when there was no wind. I've got this tailwind pushing me, so I'm going to be going faster. So I'm going to have to do something a little different. I will have to use the flaps in a different manner. And when and how I do that will be determined as I get into my routine here. So let's just see what happens. All right, here we go. So I've cut the power. I'm looking at 70 knots and 500 feet per minute. That's kind of what I want here. So I'm just going to, using just the trim wheel here and playing with the, okay, I've got my 500 feet per minute roughly. 70 knots. Okay, that's fine. We're descending. Look at our ground speed, 75 and 90. All right, we got a ways to go yet. I don't have any flaps here. And I think I'll just add 10 degrees of flaps because that's what I want to do. I'm going to add just some flaps here. Bring the nose down a little more with the trim. All right, we're looking pretty good. I'm just going to maintain this speed and this descent rate. Let's get that descent a little lower, a little faster. There we go. All right, we're going to turn a little early on this base turn because we have a 15-knot wind pushing us away from the airport. So as we make this turn, we are going to be a little farther away. So we want to make this base turn a little earlier with this wind. All right, so now we're on base. I'm still at 70 knots and 10 degrees flaps. There's our runway. Let's go ahead and start our turn to final. I'm still at 70 knots and 10 degrees of flaps. And I'm just going to leave it there because I don't believe I need more flaps here. I'm gonna make a big turn. It's sloppy flying. I'm sorry about that. But I just want to demonstrate the flaps and how they work in different conditions. All right. Remember the red over white? We're all right. So now I've got 1,500 RPMs of power going. Notice my ground speed and airspeed, indicated airspeed. I'm at 59 knots already, ground speed. So my indicated airspeed is 70. So I know I'm going to make the runway now. I'm going to cut back on the power. And I still only have 10 degrees of flaps. Look at my speed. I'm going to have to actually add power to get to the runway here. There we go. I just had to give it a little boost of power there because we have this real strong headwind. And now we're just going to bring it down, bring that nose up so we can touch down nice and easy, and then let the nose come down. So notice the difference here. I only used 10 degrees of flaps. And if you noticed, I had to add a little extra power in there to get to the runway because when I cut the power, I slowed down way too fast. So I could have made this landing with no flaps at all. So my whole point here is you use flaps when they're needed. If you don't need them, don't use them. Your conditions will dictate whether you need flaps or not, as you saw in these two scenarios. So that's it for my little video on using the flaps. I suggest that you try different scenarios yourself, set up conditions, and then practice and see what works best. Again, there are no real set rules here for when to use them. You're just going to have to learn how to do that yourself. So I hope you got something from this video. If you like this, please click the like button. If you'd like to send me a message or leave a comment, that would be great. Thanks again for watching, and God bless.